Welcome to the deep dive. Thanks for sending us this really critical report on Canada's future in the age of AGI. Today, we're going to plunge right into your sources, unpack the insights, really reveal what Canada is doing, the immense challenges it faces, and, the possible futures that lie ahead. This isn't just about Canada, though. It's like a microcosm of the choices lots of nations are grappling with right now. And we're here to distill the most important nuggets for you.
Absolutely. And the report, it really throws us straight into the deep end. It shows Canada caught between these two, well, massive forces. First, there's the breakneck speed of
Right.
AI development, really pushing towards human level intelligence. And second, a global political landscape that's frankly kind of coming apart at the seams. These aren't just minor shifts. They demand a fundamental reassessment of Canada's entire economic and security posture. It's a really high stakes moment.
Yeah, the report doesn't pull any punches. It calls this an unavoidable inflection point.
Mhm.
It feels like Canada is standing right at the edge of something huge. So what exactly are these two powerful forces? Why are they forcing Canada to rethink everything, and why now?
Well, the first one is definitely technological. We're seeing this exponential acceleration of AI, especially generative AI. The world's leading labs are in this really intense race to develop artificial general intelligence, AGI. That's systems that can match or, even surpass human cognitive abilities. Now, the timelines, they vary a bit. You've got figures like OpenAI's Sam Altman suggesting maybe 2025 to 2027. Google DeepMind's Dimas Hassabis talking 5 to 10 years, so by 2030, 2035. Anthropic's Dario Amodei is even faster, maybe 2 to 3 years, so 2026, 2028. Others like Jan LeCun at Meta are thinking 3 to 5 or maybe 5, 10 years. And Jeffrey Hinton, well, he gives a wider range, 5, 20 years. But if you look at aggregated expert opinion, like on Metaculus, the median forecast often lands around, say, 2031 to 2040. The bottom line here, though, is that AGI threatens to totally redefine economic productivity, national security, global power dynamics, and maybe faster than most people realize.
Okay, so that's the tech pressure cooker. What about the second force, the geopolitical one?
Right, the geopolitical pressure. This really centers on Canada's relationship with the U.S., which has been the cornerstone for so long. It's fundamentally shifting. Prime Minister Mark Carney has been pretty direct about it. He stated Canada is, and I quote, too reliant on the United States for defense and technology, and that Washington's predominant global role, that's a thing of the past.
A thing of the past. Wow, that's quite a statement.
It is, and there's this growing perception, the report notes, that the U.S. is beginning to monetize its hegemony,
Hmm.
basically expecting more from allies, maybe even for things like market access that were previously assumed.
So it's not just talk. There are actual policy shifts happening.
Oh, absolutely. This isn't just rhetoric. Canada is already diversifying its defense procurement, moving away from solely relying on the U.S. They're looking more towards European and, importantly, domestic suppliers, and they're hitting their NATO spending targets earlier than planned. That sends a signal.
Okay, so on the surface, you might see an AI funding package and some defense spending changes as, separate things. But the report ties them tightly together. What's the deeper argument it's making here? Are these moves part of a bigger, coordinated strategy?
Exactly. That's the core argument. The report contends that the big $2.4 billion package for the AI sector, and especially that $2 billion Canadian sovereign AI compute strategy from Budget 2024, isn't separate from the accelerated defense spending. They're direct foundational responses to these twin pressures we just talked about. These are really high-stakes national moves. They're designed to secure Canada's economic prosperity and its political sovereignty. It's about determining Canada's place in the world for generations to come, a very deliberate national strategy unfolding right now.
Okay, let's dive deeper into that digital foundation then. This $2 billion bet on sovereign compute. What does that actually involve on the ground?
Right, this Canadian sovereign AI compute strategy. It's a $2 billion investment spread over 5 years, starting 2024 or 25. It basically rests on three main pillars trying to hit different needs. First, there's up to $700 million aimed at mobilizing private sector investment. The idea is to fund new commercial AI data centers. They've already made an early investment in Cohere, which is a major Canadian AI player.
Fear, right? Okay.
Second, there's up to $1 billion, a big chunk for building substantial public supercomputing infrastructure. Now, this includes $705 million for a brand new Canadian-owned SCIP system.
SCIP.
Yeah, SCIP. It stands for Supercomputing Infrastructure Platform, I believe. It's basically dedicated high-performance computing for researchers, government, and industry. Secure, Canadian-owned. Plus, there's another $200 million in that pot for near-term upgrades to existing public compute resources. And the third pillar is the AI Compute Access Fund. That's up to $300 million. The goal there is to subsidize compute access specifically for Canadian SMEs, small and medium businesses in key sectors like life sciences, clean tech, energy, advanced manufacturing, helping them get in the game.
So 3 pillars: mobilizing private money, building public infrastructure, and subsidizing access for smaller players.
Exactly. But there's one more piece, less publicized but potentially huge. It involves enabling up to $15 billion, that's billion with a B, in aggregate loan and equity investments. The goal is to get Canadian pension funds to co-invest alongside the government in these big AI data center projects, ideally securing a 2-to-1 private to public capital ratio.
15 billion.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
serious scale. But, okay, even with all that investment, the report immediately flags this fascinating contradiction. It calls it the hyperscaler dilemma.
Oh.
Can you break down what that dilemma is? What's the strategic contradiction here for Canada?
Yeah, the hyperscaler dilemma, it really gets to the heart of the challenge. Look, Canada's cloud computing market is enormous. It's over 14.5 billion US dollars this year, and it's projected to basically triple, hitting almost $50 billion by 2033, largely thanks to AI integration.
Huge market.
Huge. But here's the catch. Globally and critically in Canada, the cloud infrastructure market is an oligopoly. It's dominated by 3 massive American companies, the hyperscalers: Amazon Web Services, AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud. Together, they control something like 63% of enterprise cloud spending globally as of early 2025. And they are by far the biggest providers in Canada.
Okay.
So the strategic contradiction is this. Canada is making a big push for sovereign AI, wanting control over its AI future, but its entire digital economy, its data, its applications, everything is built almost entirely on infrastructure owned and controlled by foreign companies. Even when AWS builds a new cloud region in Calgary, for instance, the ownership, the ultimate control, remains outside Canada.
Ah, I see. So the $2 billion isn't about kicking out AWS or Azure. That's not realistic. The report's saying this investment is more about building leverage, a bargaining chip. That's a really interesting angle.
Absolutely. That's the key insight the report offers here. This $2 billion strategy, it's not designed to displace these global giants. That would be, well, almost impossible. Instead, it's framed as a national security policy. It's designed to build a lever. It creates a secure sandbox, the safe space for sensitive government and defense AI work. It acts as a vital training ground for domestic Canadian talent. And it provides a platform to nurture Canadian AI champions, like Cohere. It's about mitigating the really acute risks of being totally dependent on foreign infrastructure and giving Canada some bargaining power down the road. It changes the dynamic, even if it doesn't change the dominant players overnight.
Okay, shifting gears a bit from the infrastructure to the economy itself. The report describes AI as this dual-edged economic sword for Canada. On one side, it's this potential elixir, a cure for a long-standing Canadian problem. What's that problem, and how could AI possibly help?
Well, that long-standing problem is Canada's persistent productivity malaise, slow growth. The OECD, for instance, projects Canada will have the slowest per capita GDP growth among all G7 nations over the next decade. That's not great.
Definitely not.
So AI is seen as this potential antidote, the big hope. Forecasts like those from TD Economics point to a massive opportunity, potentially adding $180 billion to $230 billion annually to Canada's GDP and boosting productivity growth by maybe 0.5% to 0.7% each year. That could really move the needle, break Canada out of that slow growth cycle.
A huge potential upside then. But, the report immediately identifies a major roadblock, an Achilles heel, Canada's adoption gap. What's holding Canadian businesses back from actually using AI to get those gains? And why should we be concerned about this gap?
Yeah, this adoption gap is the Achilles heel, exactly. The problem is Canadian firms are simply not adopting AI technologies as quickly as their global competitors. Deloitte found only about a quarter of Canadian firms are using AI, compared to roughly a third globally. An IBM survey actually ranked Canada second lowest in the G7 for AI adoption.
Second lowest. Ouch.
Yeah. And this lag, it could cost Canada dearly. Up to 8% of potential GDP growth over the next decade, the report estimates. There are several barriers identified: lack of capital for investment, a persistent talent drain, especially skilled AI people going to the U.S., policy uncertainty around AI regulation, and interestingly, low public trust. Only about 31% of Canadians say they trust AI, which is below the global average.
Huh. Why is that SME piece so critical?
Because small and medium enterprises, SMEs, they make up roughly half of Canada's GDP. If they fail to adopt AI, if the benefits only go to a few large corporations, then Canada risks getting the painful side of AI, the social disruption, the job losses, without reaping the broad economic benefits. That's a really bad combination.
Which leads directly to this idea of the great reskilling. The report suggests this wave of automation feels different from past ones, particularly for white-collar jobs. What's the scale of this potential disruption? And why is it hitting knowledge workers, the folks in offices, so hard this time?
This is a really crucial distinction, you're right. Past automation waves, they mostly hit blue-collar jobs, routine manual labor on assembly lines, things like that. But this current AI revolution, especially with large language models, it directly targets white-collar, knowledge-based work, the kind of work that forms the very core of Canada's service-based economy.
Right, the engine of the modern Canadian economy.
Exactly, and the predictions here are pretty stark. Some forecasts suggest many white-collar jobs could be significantly automated as early as 2027 or 2028, with major dislocations, serious job churn, really picking up between 2029 and 2031. Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, one of the leading AI labs, he warns that maybe 50%, half of junior white-collar jobs could simply disappear within 5 years.
50%. That's staggering. Are we seeing actual evidence of this already?
We are starting to see it. The report points to declining job postings for roles highly exposed to AI automation, like software development, database administration, and we have concrete examples. IBM has paused hiring for roles it thinks AI can do. Klarna, the fintech company, reported its AI assistant is now handling the workload equivalent to 700 full-time customer service agents.
700 agents. Just like that.
Just like that. It's not just a theoretical future risk, it's starting to happen now, and it hits those entry-level roles first and hardest.
And that, I guess, brings up another worrying point the report raises, this entry-level paradox. Why is the automation of entry-level tasks such a big concern for the long-term health of Canada's workforce?
The entry-level paradox is really concerning because AI, especially current AI, is often best at automating precisely those routine foundational tasks. Things like basic coding, summarizing documents, data entry, initial research, the stuff usually given to junior employees, interns, new graduates.
The tasks where you learn the ropes.
Exactly. It's how new talent learns the business, gains practical skills, proves themselves, and starts climbing the career ladder. But if AI systems are doing more and more of those entry-level tasks, how do new graduates get their foot in the door? How do they get that crucial first experience?
Yeah, where do they start?
Right, and the report cites emerging evidence suggesting this is already happening. Hiring for recent graduates in the tech sector reportedly fell by 25% in 2024. But interestingly, hiring for professionals with maybe 2 to 5 years of experience increased by 27% in the same period.
So companies want people who are already trained, maybe skipping that initial training phase.
It looks that way. It creates this potential structural threat to the entire talent pipeline. If you break that first rung of the ladder, you could end up with a shortage of experienced mid-level and senior professionals down the line. It really forces a complete rethinking of how we educate, train, and onboard new talent into the workforce.
Okay, so talent is obviously crucial in this global AI race. The report talks about Canada's tech talent strategy and calls it a clever act of H-1B arbitrage. What does H-1B arbitrage mean in this context? How did Canada basically exploit a bottleneck in the U.S. system?
Right, the H-1B arbitrage. It was a pretty smart tactical move by Canada. So the H-1B visa program in the U.S., that's the main visa for skilled foreign workers, especially in tech. But it has some serious limitations. The biggest one is the annual cap. Only 85,000 new H-1B visas are issued each year, and that number hasn't changed in 2 decades, even as demand has skyrocketed.
85,000. That doesn't sound like much for the entire U.S. economy.
It's really not.
Right.
For fiscal year 2025, they had over 440,000 people register for those 85,000 spots. That means more than 75% were rejected just based on the lottery. Plus, there are other issues. If an H-1B worker gets laid off, they only have 60 days to find a new sponsoring employer, or they have to leave the country. And getting work permits for spouses or transitioning to a green card can be incredibly slow and difficult.
Okay, so the U.S. system has some real pain points for skilled workers. How did Canada leverage that?
Canada directly targeted those pain points. They launched a special program, an H-1B open work permit. It offered people who already held a U.S. H-1B visa a 3-year permit to come work for any employer in Canada. No specific sponsor needed initially, plus their families could get permits too. The initial cap for this program was 10,000 applicants. It was filled in a single day back in July 2023.
One day.
Oh.
That's incredible demand. Clearly, Canada tapped into something there.
Yeah.
But the report immediately throws some cold water on this, calling it a temporary tactical victory. Why might this advantage be precarious for Canada? Why might it not last?
It's precarious because the whole strategy fundamentally relies on the U.S. not fixing its own broken immigration system. It depends on continued legislative gridlock and dysfunction down south. While comprehensive immigration reform has been politically toxic in the U.S. for years, that could change. A future crisis or a clear realization of the economic cost of losing talent could potentially break that deadlock. And even without Congress, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security is already working on modernizing aspects of the program through regulations, trying to make it a bit more flexible.
So if the U.S. gets its act together.
If the U.S. significantly reforms the H-1B program or creates better pathways for skilled immigrants, Canada's main pull factor for that specific talent pool just evaporates. Canada risks becoming merely the best second choice again, rather than actively poaching talent due to U.S. system failures. The advantage could be temporary.
Makes sense. Okay, beyond the H-1B play, Canada is also trying to attract the growing digital nomad crowd, these remote workers. How is Canada positioned to attract these, highly mobile, skilled workers? And what's the big catch the report points out?
Right, digital nomads. This is a huge growing demographic. Estimates suggest there could be over 50 million globally by 2025. These are often highly skilled, highly educated people working remotely. Canada actually looks pretty good on the surface for attracting them. It allows digital nomads to enter the country as visitors for up to 6 months while working remotely for their foreign employers. No special visa needed for that short term. And Canada's advantages are obvious. High quality of life, safety, political stability, excellent digital infrastructure. It often ranks as a top destination in surveys.
Sounds good so far. And what's the catch?
The critical disadvantage, the big catch, is Canada's tax system. Canada has a worldwide tax system. This means if you become a tax resident, which can happen if you spend more than 183 days in the country, or establish what they call significant residential ties, you owe Canadian taxes on your entire global income.
So if you're a high-earning nomad working for a U.S. company but living in Toronto for more than 6 months,
You could suddenly owe Canadian income tax on your U.S. salary, potentially at high Canadian rates on top of any U.S. obligations. This makes Canada much less attractive for long-term digital nomads compared to dozens of other countries. Places like Spain, Portugal, Hungary, the UAE, Costa Rica, Panama. They've all rolled out specific digital nomad visas, often paired with really favorable tax regimes, low flat taxes, or only taxing income earned within that country, territorial taxation.
so Canada's tax policy is misaligned with its goal of attracting long-term mobile talent.
Exactly. This policy misalignment risks Canada just being a temporary tourist stop for nomads rather than a place where they put down roots and contribute long term. They come for a few months, enjoy the summer, then leave before the tax implications kick in.
Okay, let's pivot to governance. How is Canada trying to manage AI? The report says Canada has been proactive in developing policies, but it describes the result as a patchwork of strategies. What does this patchwork look like?
Yeah, patchwork is a good description. It's not one single overarching strategy, but several efforts spread across different parts of the government. You've got the AI strategy for the federal public service itself, which is mainly focused on how the government internally adopts AI responsibly. It includes setting up an AI center of expertise. Then there's the Department of National Defense and the Canadian Armed Forces, DNDCF. They have their own AI strategy. Their goal is to be AI-enabled by 2030, mainly for national security purposes, improving operations, and ensuring interoperability with allies.
Okay, so internal government use, defense. What else?
There's also the Communications Security Establishment, CSE, Canada's Signals Intelligence Agency. They have their AI strategy. That's focused on using AI for their specific national security missions, like cybersecurity, intelligence gathering, but also, crucially, on countering malicious uses of AI by adversaries. And then, on the legislative side, there's the big one. The Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, or AI. This was introduced as part of a larger digital policy bill, Bill C-27. It's intended to be Canada's first binding legal framework specifically for AI. It proposes creating an AI and data commissioner and setting up rules for developing and deploying so-called high-impact AI systems.
So it sounds like Canada's trying to be responsible, putting guardrails in place, thinking about defense, internal use. Seems quite thorough in some ways. But here's the kicker. The report argues these frameworks, while maybe responsible for today's AI, are dangerously mismatched to the impending AGI revolution. Why is there such a profound disconnect? What's the mismatch?
That's exactly the core tension the report highlights. It's a crucial point. Canada's current policies, including AI, are really designed for the AI we have now, what we call narrow AI. They're focused on managing specific risks from specific applications, like bias in hiring algorithms or ensuring transparency in chatbots. The report kind of frames this as responsibly managing a regional flood. You build dikes, manage drainage, etc.
Okay, managing the current known risks.
Right. But the leading technologists, the people building the next generation of AI, they're forecasting something much bigger. A global tsunami, as the report puts it, artificial general intelligence, possibly within a decade. And the current Canadian policy framework, this patchwork, it's just not built for that scale of disruption. It's like bringing sandbags to face a tidal wave.
So what are the specific AGI threats that current policies don't address? How does AGI threaten national sovereignty in ways narrow AI doesn't?
The report outlines several profound threats to sovereignty from AGI. First, there's the risk of monopolization of power. The first nation, or maybe even the first corporation, to achieve true AGI could gain a decisive, maybe even permanent strategic advantage over everyone else. Imagine a global monopoly on intelligence itself.
That's a monopoly on intelligence.
It is. Second, AGI could lead to the obsolescence of traditional defense. AGI could potentially render billions of dollars of current military hardware, tanks, jets, ships almost useless overnight. It could enable entirely new kinds of weapons of mass destruction, like vast swarms of coordinated autonomous drones, or launch cyber attacks on critical infrastructure far beyond anything we can currently defend against.
Making current defense strategies irrelevant.
Potentially, yes. And third, there's the threat to governance and social cohesion. AGI could be used by states to create unprecedented systems of surveillance and control, a kind of despotic leviathan, or conversely, it could empower non-state actors, even small groups or individuals, with capabilities that rival states, undermining government legitimacy entirely in absent leviathan scenario, where the state loses control. These are existential level risks that go far beyond the scope of current regulations focused on narrow AI bias or transparency. This mismatch, the report argues, is perhaps Canada's single greatest strategic vulnerability looking ahead.
Okay, this brings us right to the core of the report's assessment. 3 distinct plausible futures for Canada in this AI era. The report lays these out not as firm predictions, but as scenarios for you, the listener, to really consider. Let's start with the one it deems most probable.
Right. The first outcome, the one assigned the highest probability around 65%, is called the digital dominion. In this future, Canada essentially becomes a prosperous, well-integrated junior partner within a technology bloc led by the United States. The sovereign AI compute strategy. It has some modest success. The public supercomputer gets used by university researchers, the Access Fund helps some SMEs adopt AI tools, but it doesn't fundamentally shift the market dominance away from the big American hyperscalers. They still run the show.
So the $2 billion lever doesn't provide that much leverage in the end.
Not enough to change the fundamental structure in this scenario, no. The H-1B arbitrage provides an initial talent boost, but that advantage fades as the U.S. eventually enacts some immigration reforms. What you see is a sort of branch plant digital economy solidifying. Many skilled Canadian tech workers end up working for American companies, either remotely from Canada or after moving south. Canada gets good at applying AI developed elsewhere, but it remains primarily a consumer, not a creator, of frontier AI models. It aligns closely with U.S. tech standards, U.S. regulations, U.S. foreign policy objectives related to tech.
So wealthy and secure, but dependent.
Exactly. Prosperous, stable, secure, but strategically dependent. Some early warning indicators for this future, things to watch for in the next 1-3 years, would be Canadian AI startups frequently getting acquired by U.S. firms rather than scaling up domestically, low commercial uptake of Canada's public compute facilities, even if academia uses them, and Canada's overall productivity growth staying stubbornly below that 0.5% annual target. The long-term implication, 10 years out or more, is that stable but dependent digital economy aligned with the U.S. bloc.
Okay, that's the most likely path. What's the second possible future?
The second scenario, given a medium probability, maybe around 25%, is a sovereign contender. This is the more ambitious, high-risk, high-reward path. Here, Canada executes its bold strategy with surprising success. The sovereign AI compute strategy really works. It catalyzes massive co-investment from those Canadian pension funds, leading to the creation of world-class domestically controlled data centers.
So the $15 billion loan program actually gets deployed effectively.
Yes, in this scenario, it does. And alongside that, there's a major national push, perhaps focused on open source AI models, that allows Canadian firms to bypass some of the data and compute advantages held by the American giants. Critically, a Canadian company emerges as a globally competitive national champion in a specific high value AI niche. Maybe something like sustainable AI, AI for resource management, or neurosymbolic reasoning, where Canada has research strengths.
A Canadian AI leader on the world stage.
Exactly. And this is coupled with an aggressive national AI adoption mission that actually succeeds in closing that business adoption gap we talked about.
Yo.
Think things like tax super deductions for AI investment by SMEs, regulatory sandboxes to encourage experimentation, and on the global stage, Canada skillfully uses its middle power status. It takes the lead in forging something like a digital G7 alliance, perhaps with the EU, Japan, the UK, focused on shared AI standards, creating international data trusts, maybe even joint R&D projects, as a counterweight to US and Chinese dominance.
So carving out a leadership role.
Yes. Becoming a respected leader in specific high-value AI segments and a key player in global AI governance. Early warning indicators for this path. Look for major Canadian pension funds announcing significant joint ventures in AI infrastructure within the next few years. Watch if a Canadian firm genuinely breaks into, say, the top 5 global AI model providers in a specific area, and look for concrete announcements of formal AI standards partnerships between Canada, the EU, and Japan. The long-term implication here is global leadership in niche AI, much higher productivity growth and economic dynamism for Canada, and significantly enhanced national sovereignty and global influence.
Okay, that's the optimistic, ambitious path. What's the third scenario? The downside risk.
The third outcome is the productivity paradox. This is assigned a low probability, maybe around 10%, but it has a very high negative impact. This is essentially the failure state. In this future, the sovereign AI compute strategy gets bogged down, it suffers from delays, cost overruns, maybe bureaucratic infighting. It just doesn't deliver the needed infrastructure. At the same time, business adoption of AI across the broader economy remains sluggish. It gets confined to just a few large corporations. And crucially, those corporations use AI primarily for cost-cutting, automating jobs, laying people off rather than using it to innovate, create new products, or drive growth.
So the disruption happens without the benefits.
Precisely. You get massive white-collar job displacement, hitting those entry-level positions especially hard, but without the corresponding creation of new, higher-value jobs. Productivity gains are minimal and concentrated in just a few firms, while the social costs unemployment, the need for widespread reskilling, inequality skyrocket. Then, imagine a new U.S. administration comes in and actually passes comprehensive immigration reform, fixing the H-1B system. This suddenly reverses that temporary talent flow Canada benefited from, and might even trigger a significant brain drain of Canada's own top AI experts heading south for better opportunities.
A perfect storm of negative factors.
Exactly. Canada ends up facing economic stagnation, rising social friction and inequality, and diminished influence on the world stage. Early warning signs for this grim scenario. Watch if those sovereign compute projects start missing key milestones or deadlines. Keep an eye on white-collar unemployment figures. Are they rising sharply without corresponding job creation in new sectors? And of course, monitor U.S. immigration policy. If major H-1B reform passes and leads to a net outflow of tech talent from Canada, that's a huge red flag. The long-term implications are pretty bleak. Economic stagnation, falling behind G7 peers, social unrest, and a loss of vital technological talent and capacity.
3 very different futures: Dominion, Contender, Paradox. But the report is really clear. These aren't set in stone. They depend heavily on the choices Canada makes right now. So what are key actions? What preparations does the report suggest to steer towards the desirable sovereign contender outcome, while also mitigating the risks of the other two?
The report structures its recommendations around preparing for or aiming for each scenario. To actually achieve the sovereign contender, that aspirational goal requires immediate, bold action on policy and investment. First, immediately activate that potential $15 billion loan and equity program. Get the pension funds involved at scale to build that sovereign compute infrastructure now.
Go big or go home on compute.
Basically, yes. Second, launch that national AI adoption mission. Use powerful incentives like tax super deductions to get SMEs investing in AI, and, just as importantly, in training their employees to use it. Third, address the talent issue head-on. Introduce preferential tax regimes specifically designed to attract and retain highly skilled mobile talent and those long-term digital nomads. Make the tax system an advantage, not a disadvantage.
Flipping the tax paradox.
Exactly. Fourth, fund the unconventional. Support AI research that isn't just about scaling bigger models. Look at alternative paradigms, energy-efficient AI, neurosymbolic approaches, and establish grand challenges using AI to solve uniquely Canadian problems, like in resource management or healthcare delivery in remote regions. And finally, on the diplomatic front, proactively initiate those digital G7 talks with the EU, Japan, the UK. Start building alliances now around shared standards, data trusts, joint R&D, and use Canada's middle power reputation to actively champion a global framework for managing the risks of AGI. Don't wait to be invited, lead.
That's a powerful, ambitious agenda for the contender path. But what about preparing for the more probable digital dominion future? If that's the likely default, what should Canada do?
If the digital dominion looks like the most probable path, the strategic focus needs to shift. It becomes less about building frontier models and more about becoming world-class at adopting and integrating AI developed elsewhere, primarily from the US. So, policy and education should pivot. Make that federal AI center of expertise a global leader in responsible AI implementation and integration strategies for government and industry. Massively scale up workforce retraining and lifelong learning programs, create new kinds of apprenticeship models specifically designed to tackle that entry-level paradox, helping people gain skills alongside AI systems.
Focus on adaptation and integration skills.
Precisely. Canadian AI regulations, like ADA, should be explicitly designed for seamless interoperability with U.S. systems and standards to reduce friction for businesses operating cross-border. Education curricula, from K-12 to university, need a major overhaul to focus less on rote knowledge, which AI will handle, and more on skills that augment AI, critical thinking, creative problem solving, collaboration, digital ethics, and investment. Reorient public R&D funding towards applied AI. Focus on using existing AI tools to solve specific Canadian industrial challenges. AI for optimizing mining operations, precision agriculture, improving healthcare diagnostics in Canadian contexts.
So becoming a really smart, efficient user and integrator of AI.
Exactly. Making the best of that dependent but potentially prosperous position.
Okay, and finally, what about mitigating the worst-case scenario, the productivity paradox? What's the contingency planning needed there?
Preparing for the productivity paradox is about building resilience and safety nets, assuming the economic transition goes badly wrong. Policy needs to focus on the social safety net. Proactively design and, importantly, pilot new social support systems anticipating large-scale job displacement. This could include things like portable benefit systems that aren't tied to a specific employer, or running serious universal basic income UBI pilot programs to understand their effectiveness.
Preparing for major disruption.
Yes, and consider legislation, like requiring companies that undertake large-scale automation leading to significant layoffs to contribute to a dedicated just transition fund to support affected workers and communities. On the monitoring side, Canada needs better real-time data. Establish a real-time labor market observatory using public-private data sharing to track AI-driven job displacement at a granular level, which sectors, which regions, which skills are being affected right now, and have contingency plans ready. If mass layoffs hit specific sectors, be prepared with emergency funding for community colleges and vocational schools to offer rapid reskilling programs tailored to emerging needs. It's about crisis preparedness.
Building the lifeboats, just in case.
Essentially, yes. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst.
The report really drives home this idea of a choice point at the end. It emphasizes that Canada, it has so many of the right ingredients for success in the AI age. It's got a world-class research community, especially in deep learning. It has political stability, abundant clean energy, which AI desperately needs, a globally trusted reputation. The argument seems to be that the missing piece isn't really about fundamental capacity. It's about having a unified, clear, and crucially, a relentlessly executed national strategy. The will to choose a path and stick to it. So as you listen to this, you can really see how the choices Canada makes, maybe even in the next year or two, could set its trajectory for decades. It feels like a genuinely stark choice between aiming for strategic autonomy as a sovereign contender, settling for comfortable dependency as a digital dominion, or risking a really challenging decline into the productivity paradox.
It really does underscore the stakes, and it leaves us and you with a fascinating question to ponder. If a nation like Canada seemingly possesses all the foundational ingredients for a prosperous AI future, the talent, the resources, the stability, What is it that truly defines its capacity to actually become that sovereign contender? Is it just about having bold policies on paper? Or is there something deeper required, something about national will, societal alignment, the ability to mobilize collectively towards a difficult, ambitious goal? Think about what that means, not just for Canada, but for any nation trying to navigate this AI tsunami. What's the secret sauce?